尊敬的各位观众、法师们、教授们，大家早上好！欢迎参加2022佛教管理文化论坛。在论坛正式开始之前，请允许我为大家宣读本次论坛的温馨提示。我们今天的论坛是通过网络进行，工作人员将会全体静音，以及关闭视讯功能，以确保论坛秩序，避免影响他人。感谢您的理解。嘉宾在演讲结束后会继续回答大家的问题，各位朋友可以点击聊天区的提问链接，写下自己的疑问。接下来，本次论坛正式开始。尊敬的各位法师、各位教授、各位观众，欢迎出席2022佛教管理文化论坛。本论坛由香港中文大学人间佛教研究中心与财团法人佛光山人间佛教研究院主办，以及十院智库与慧海文化协办。首先，我们将进行第5场发表，主题为 Gender Equality in Buddhism and its Importance for Business。在发表开始之前，我将为大家宣读注意事项。为确保论坛顺利进行，每位主讲人发言时间为30分钟，工作人员将于27分钟时做第1次提醒，于30分钟时做第2次提醒。每位语坛人发言时间为15分钟，工作人员将于12分钟时做第1次提醒，于15分钟时做第2次提醒。下面有请本次发表主持人，香港浸会大学宗教及哲学系吴有能教授。
谢谢主持，听到吗？
对。
Venerable monks and nuns from Foguangshan, Director Professor Chen Jianhuang, Professors Holloway, Professor Wu Zhishen, Professor Cao Gang, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the 5th section of this conference on Buddhist management culture. I am Dr. William Ng. I am currently a professor from the Department of Religion and Philosophy at the Hong Kong Baptist University. In no time, we will be listening to the presentation from our honorable guest speaker, Professor Kenneth Holloway. But before that, let me introduce to you the 2 discussants from this panel. The first one is Dr. Wu Zhishen, the Executive Director of Dongling Jueyuan and an Adjunct Assistant Professor of the Center of Buddhist Studies at the Hong Kong University. The second discussant is Professor Cao Gang from the School of Business Administration of the South China University of Technology in Guangzhou City in southern China. Professor Kenneth Holloway is the Livingston Chair of Asian Studies at Florida Atlantic University, specializing on the studies of early Chinese religious and intellectual history. He has published a lot, and among them are the 2 books on Guodian, the newly discovered seat of Chinese religious and political philosophy, and the second one, The Quest of Morality in Early China. Both are from OUP, Oxford University Press. He traveled a lot personally and is fluent in Chinese. He's also a Dharma or layman Dharma lecturer of the Foguangshan. Now, without any further delay, let me welcome Professor Holloway to present a paper on gender equality in Buddhism and its importance for business. Let us welcome Professor Holloway with a big hand. Professor, please.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Professor Ng. So let me get right to sharing my screen, because I have far more PowerPoints slides already than is possible to discuss in 30 minutes. So I assume the screen can be seen. So let me actually just Yeah, let me just show it in this way. It's easier, and get rid of this. And okay, so we're good. So the thesis of my talk is that, what is Buddhism, right? In terms of this question of gender equality in Buddhism and its importance for business, right? To begin, we have to define what is Buddhism. And I'm defining Buddhism along the lines of what Venerable Master Xingyun describes, that Buddhism is humanistic Buddhism. This is a religion that reflects the values of modern society. However, this is not something that was created in recent times. Instead, it reflects the original ideas of the Buddha, which were practiced in traditional China, particularly in the Song. And this is the book that we're all familiar with, probably, called Humanistic Buddhism, holding true to the original intents of the Buddha. So there's a challenge in this, right? The challenge is that this traditional religion, Buddhism, which is modern, is in fact something that came to be this way, not in recent times, but in antiquity, right? And so this is the first paragraph of my paper. This is the only slide I'm going to read just because I feel like I got the prose right here. So humanistic Buddhism, as described by Venerable Master Xingyun, involves an engagement with the problems of contemporary society. Rather than being a modern invention, humanistic Buddhism is seen as a feature of the religion since its inception. This is diametrically opposed to an extensive line of eminent intellectuals who argued that Buddhism is not concerned with practical questions of contemporary society. We have Arthur Schopenhauer of the 19th century, who loved Buddhism, but believed that what he loved about it was disengaged with society. It was about salvation in the afterlife, not in this life. Max Weber built upon this and argued that this worldly concerns were outside of the realm of Buddhism, and so this resulted in the economic stagnation in Asia. Protestantism, to Weber, was the only way a civilization could prosper. And this idea has been repeated ad nauseum. The most recent iteration is this fellow Neil Ferguson, was a Harvard University professor, now is a Stanford University professor. And his series is called The West and the Rest, and basically he was just repackaging Weber's thesis. So this is the standard model, that modern is this forward-looking, right, progressive, dynamic phenomenon where both men and women work, and we have gender equality. That's the green here. And then there's pre-modern, the pre-modern world, which is conservative, backward-looking, stagnant. Women stay home, men go out and work to feed the family, and genders are not equal. However, if this progressive phenomenon called humanistic Buddhism is, as Master Xingyun argues, and I believe he's correct, then this standard model has a problem. It cannot possibly truly reflect what's going on. So let's just get the standard model straight before I go through and point out its flaws. Okay, the standard model, in terms of understanding that gender equality and women's involvement in business is something which is new, based upon that idea, the old broken society often looks to China as a key part of that model. Particularly, they saw 19th century China as static, isolated, right? They point to the Great Wall of China as an indication of this hermit kingdom. Never mind the fact that scholars such as Arthur Waldron have argued conclusively that the Great Wall of China was not even there for most of the history, but okay, this is the standard model we're talking about. Modernization is seen as something which is in opposition to Chinese traditions. This tradition is seen as predominantly Confucian, and that this was a system where women had to endure awful oppressive treatment, foot binding, infanticide, widow suicide. And this is the standard traditional world, which finally, when missionaries arrived, the economic system that supported it is finally broken. Women are liberated from this oppression through this destabilization of the old society during the Opium Wars. So that's the first part of the standard model. Now, in terms of that China's traditions are not part of this modern world, and it's a break from the tradition that represents modernity. Now, the second part of the standard model is how it relates to women's lives specifically, and this question of gender equality. So we generally think that gender equality is something which is very recent, right? This is not just a perception we might walk around with. The sources listed at the bottom of the slide here, support that, verify that, confirm that, right? 1957, the Treaty of Rome incorporated the rights of men and women to equal pay for equal work, right? So the first moment when women's involvement in business could be done on an equal footing, the beginning of that from a legal perspective is 57, right? And then in recent past, right, if you look at the search term gender equality and enterprise management in Google Scholar, it spikes sharply. There was 5,000 articles in the 1980 to 1990. It tripled from 1990 to 2000 and tripled again from 2000 to 2010. So looking at these numbers down here, it looks like, wow, interest in gender equality and enterprise management, women in business. This is something which is very, very new based on the scholarship being published on this subject. And then the second part of the standard model is that opponents of gender equality for women in business argue that their opposition to this is based on traditional social norms, right? In the past, a woman's place was in the home, women were subordinate to men, and this remained constant throughout antiquity. And this is not just something which exists in popular culture. It is reflected amongst academic researchers, even those who work back in the Stone Age, as I mentioned in my full article, which was distributed, right? At the beginning of this change, right? So we have to look back to the 70s as the beginning of this moment when things change, but really there's a lot of continued usage of anthropological data, such as Valerie Hanson's otherwise excellent textbook on China, which when trying to explain Confucian society in the Warring States period, 770 to 221 BC, she argues, based upon the anthropological work of Marjorie Wolf, who's out there doing field work in the 70s, asking people, women in rural Taiwan, about their lives. And so the usage of recent anthropological data to describe ancient Chinese society refers back to this idea that pre-modern society is stagnant and conservative. You can just ask someone what the society was like, who's living today, and get a good sense of what things were like back in antiquity. So this is the major error in Hanson's book here. So in contrast to that standard model, we pause for a second and look at this slide. Humanistic Buddhism sees things differently. Rather than seeing a rupture, right, a 破裂 between the past, present, and the future, right, that the past is something which has to be broken with to create this modernity. Humanistic Buddhism argues that there should be this continuum, that the values represented in Buddhism should be able to be found in the past. And so this is a very different perspective. Fortunately and interestingly, this perspective is reflected by a lot of recent scholarship. And one of the first people to challenge this standard model, arguing that women's equality is something that is simply modern and not found in the ancient world, is Dr. Patricia Ebrey of the University of Washington. And her specialty is legal and social history of the Song Dynasty. And this is her book, The Inner Quarters, published by Berkeley in 1993. And the introduction to the book explains how previously it was seen that the Tang Dynasty was a time when women enjoyed the greatest freedom in Chinese history. And the Song was seen as the beginning of the decline. Foot binding begins, the texts start to be published encouraging women to be chaste. After they become widows, all of the problems begin. But Ibri argues that no other time in Chinese history did women have greater economic power than in the Song dynasty. So she's arguing for a switch, that in fact the Song is the time when women had the greatest freedom and equality. And one sort of example of this is the practice of matrilocal or uxorolocal marriage was quite socially acceptable in the Song dynasty. So a man marrying into a woman's family. There's one moment in her book where she describes there are books that they sold in the Song dynasty with stock phrases to help you to write cards or letters to people to congratulate them on their marriage. And there's sections of these books that survive that contain congratulatory phrases that you would use to congratulate someone on their second marriage. Now, I don't know about Hong Kong, but in America, the idea that when someone gets married and they have a toast, ding, 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 congratulations, no one would congratulate someone and say, this is your second marriage. We're so happy for your second marriage. That wouldn't be discussed. But in the Song dynasty, it was actually socially acceptable for women to be divorced, to women to get remarried. There's actually one emperor whose mother had 3 fathers. So this was something that even elite society was touched by. This is a very different time than this standard model that we're used to. Okay. In terms of Tang versus Song, there's an article by Anne Hireman that discusses the lives of Buddhist nuns in the eyes of leading early Tang masters. So the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907, is a time period which people used to think was the height of women's equality in early China, in pre-modern China. But when you look at someone like Dao Xuan, you realize that really he had a very negative view of women. And he resented that there were women Buddhist nuns in the world for 3 reasons. First, Dao Xuan argued that during the life of the Buddha, there's the legendary story that allowing women to be monastics was going to shorten the life of the Buddhist community, It would be shortened, it would last no more than 500 years. And more practically, he argued that if these devout women could not become nuns, then they would provide food and financial support to monks. Now that they become nuns, male monks suffer. And he also is very famous for supporting the Bajingfa, the 8 important rules, Gurundharmas, that subordinated nuns to monks. And so a nun could not point out the faults of a monk, but a monk could point out a nun's faults. So nuns had to stay silent if a monk screwed up. They couldn't say anything. And so this negative view of women in Buddhism is a Tang phenomenon. And in interesting contrast to that, there's an article by Xie Dinghua, which argues that Buddhist nuns in the Song had a lot more equality. She points to the beginning of the Song under Taizu, who issued an edict banning the ordination of nuns by monks. And that was central to Dao Xuan. He felt that the ordination of nuns in front of monks was sufficient to consider a woman to be a monastic. It was supposed to be repeated in front of nuns, but it wasn't necessary to do that. Song Taizu said, we're banning that. Women should take charge of their own ordination ceremonies, manage their nunneries with no direct contact of monks. And in fact, Foguangshan today and most Buddhist temples in Taiwan, they don't follow the Bajingfa anymore. They don't use that. That's been abandoned. And the beginning of that abandonment is the Song dynasty, which points to why this idea that this modern idea of gender equality and business, we think of it as modern, but hopefully you're starting to think, well, maybe the Song Dynasty was a moment when gender equality was really something quite important that we should take a new look at. So Song Buddhist nunneries were independent of male oversight. They attained important social, political, and economic status. And the lives of women in Buddhist nunneries paralleled the lives of laywomen. Laywomen also had a lot of social, political, and economic status, right? They were involved in commerce, had access to wealth. And because of this, they themselves could become donors and establish more temples for women. So there's this virtuous cycle going on here. And it is because women were involved in commerce and business in the Song Dynasty that they were able to create this community for women. One example that Professor Xie points out is that in Jiangxi, there's a nunnery that produces silk of such fine quality that they could charge 12–13% higher than others could charge. Temples for women were centers, economic centers. They funded the printing of scriptures, building of other temples, hosting feasts. And in the Song, the most elite temples were called Shifang Congming, or public monasteries. And if they could be given this status, then that was a real privilege. It marked them as above and beyond other temples. And nunneries were given this honor. One of the most famous is the Huguo Chanyuan in the capital of the Song, Kaifang. They had the honor that they could recommend 2 nuns every year to the emperor, who would consider then bestowing upon these 2 nuns the honor of receiving a purple robe. So these nuns in the Song had significant economic, political, and social status. And the reason that this was possible is because it was normal for women to work in the Song. Why? It was common, they frequently took charge of the family business, according to Professor Ibri. In large families, that's how it worked. Growing and managing the property, overseeing the production of silk and other cloth. This was a major source of income. This was the source of income for the family, and women were in charge of that. Instead of being involved in business, what men would often do is focus on their official positions and be involved in scholarly pursuits. And there's a really funny story of this woman named Mrs. Li, who lives from 1104 to 1177, and she's managing the family business. And one day, a stranger walks into the courtyard, the courtyard of the house. A stranger walks in carrying a bag of rice, a sack of rice. And the husband says, "Who is this?" to his wife. "Who is this? And why is he carrying rice into our house?" And the wife says, "Oh, that's one of our tenants. He's here to pay the rent." The husband had no idea about the management of the family business. It was all up to the wife. So the husband could concentrate on his official career and scholarly pursuits. So this was the standard model of the Song Dynasty, that women worked in business, and that's how they supported themselves. And actually, one thing that, because you might have heard the news overnight that in Tangshan, there was a Saokao restaurant, a barbecue restaurant, and 4 women were assaulted, 2 were hospitalized, beaten with an inch of their life. And the question is, how could this happen in China? Well, unfortunately, it also happens in America. And people saying, why is it that China doesn't have more laws to protect women? It was only recently that domestic violence was grounds for divorce. According to the BBC, it's only in 2001 that domestic violence could be grounds for divorce. In the introduction to Ibri's book, she describes a woman whose husband is out sleeping with a prostitute, and he puts her up in an apartment and supporting her and bankrupting the family. And the woman drags the husband by the sleeve. This is the account that we have of the narrative from the Song Dynasty. The wife drags him by the sleeve to the court, sues for divorce, gets custody of their daughter, and the judge believes her when she says, "My husband is a man of ill repute. If my daughter continues to be raised in this family, she's going to be morally corrupt. Also, I want a divorce, and the judge grants it. And what does she do? She goes and sets up a shop, a business to support herself with jars and jugs, and she sells things to support herself. One day, the husband comes by her store, starts telling her, you're doing this all wrong. In America, we call this mansplaining. And she kicked him out of the store. It was her store. She was supporting herself through this. She'd gotten rid of this husband who was immoral, and she did not need him to support her. She could support herself through business. So this idea that women in business is a Song dynasty phenomenon is really important. Don't have time for this slide, but the engagement of humanistic Buddhism in the Song is something that recent scholars have come to understand. Previously, it was seen that Buddhism was not engaged in the Song because very famous Confucian Zhu Xi said so. Now we understand that Buddhism saw engagement as the standard by which they measured themselves. Both Linji and Caodong lineages in the Song both deeply valued social engagement. And so that's how we understand this today. So why is this so important to understand that the engagement of women in business and that connection to Buddhism goes back to the Song? The beginning of the idea that this Song dynasty time should be seen as modern dates back to the 1890s. The man is named Naito Hunan. And he was the first to argue that modernity in Asia had nothing to do with Matthew Perry, not the actor, but Commodore Matthew Perry, the guy who brought gunboats to open Japan. Naito Hunan argues that's not what Asia's modern period represents. The Song dynasty is when Asia's modernity began. And Patricia Ebry is following in Naito's footsteps. Okay. Now, why is this so valuable? In a country like Japan, they had been seeing all this modernizing as this entirely Western project. And for a lot of people, it was hard to accept because it was foreign and it was new. And Naito argued, wait a second, no, this is neither new nor is it foreign. This is something that we can find back in Asian history, particularly Chinese history of the Song dynasty. And it was incredibly controversial, but it was quite a powerful idea. It's sort of the intellectual precursor to the idea of Master Xing Yun's humanistic Buddhism, that we can look to the past to understand our modern present, and that humanistic Buddhism is the conduit that connects past to present to future. Now, how modern was the Song? I was in the last class that Professor Robert Hartwell taught at the University of Pennsylvania. These are a couple of numbers from article of his from 1962 that is the basis of this book published by Cambridge in 2004. Iron production in the Song was massive. It was comparable to iron production during Europe's Industrial Revolution. China attained a 12-fold increase in iron production. England could only produce a quadruple increase in the same, 200-year period. And the size of the cities in China, Suzhou had 2.4 million, Jiaozhou had 4 million people, Hangzhou 1.8 million people. This is an incredibly economically powerful time, a monetized economy. And during this time, what's going on, what's one of the drivers to this is women in business. The part of how we know all of this is because of the printing press. Much of what we know about Tang in earlier periods is filtered through the Song. Now, in the 3 minutes I have left, I want to transition to talking about how Buddhism today sees this heritage of the past and the equality that women experienced in the past as the reason that they should and need to claim equality today. There's a scholar named Paula Arai whose book, Women Living Zen, was published in 1998. And in her conclusion, she says this about these Zen nuns in Japan fighting for gender equality. She says, in their fight for institutionalizing egalitarian pingdong regulations, 20th century Soto nuns acted as though they were only asking for what history had told them was their due. They saw their history as one filled with valiant nuns, not one that was against women. Their interpretation of history was based on the fact that first ordained Buddhists in Japan were women, and that many important women in Japanese history were nuns. And so they saw this, they saw themselves as part of this tradition. Now, Fo Guangshan is also a very important institution for promoting gender equality in business. This is a picture of Guangming College from a presentation I was part of at the United Nations in 2019 at the 63rd session of the Commission on the Status of Women. This is the inaugural class of Guangming College, right? These are the men back here, right? You can see them wearing trousers. The women are all wearing dresses. The vast majority of the students are women. They're all receiving free education to attend this college. And these women were recruited actually when the Philippines was devastated by a hurricane. And what happens is the president is a local Filipino woman with a PhD in education. She organizes Guangming College and recruits socioeconomically marginalized women to give them a free college education to transform them. And in our presentation, we had a couple of women from the first inaugurated class, Dian Pangnaban, and this is her. This is primarily an arts college, so this is her teaching other students. This is her performing. This is Heidi Amello, another inaugural class graduate. And the point is that these women, this is President Helen Correa. This is Heidi receiving her diploma, and she's actually a Muslim woman, really quite amazing individual. And so Fo Guangshan promotes women to get women out of the cycle of poverty through education, and Guangming College is where that happens. And this is how Buddhism is part of this story. And this is their inaugural class. So I believe I have 2 minutes to wrap up. I'll just say, how is it that myself, a professor of religious history, is researching business? Well, I was asked to give a lecture at Dajue in Yixing in 2015. I was talking to the nun saying, sure, I'll give a lecture. What is the background of the people who are going to be in the audience? And she said, well, there's a business group who's going to be there. Most of them are business people. I said, okay, I guess I'll start talking about business and Buddhism. And so I gave a lecture in 2015, and that was repeated in 2017. These are pictures from 2017. Why gender equality? I started teaching this in 2003. What happened was Dorothy Ko, one of the leading early researchers of women and gender in Chinese history, had left Rutgers University to go to Barnard College. I was asked by the department chair, can you teach a class in women in Chinese history? And I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. And what I did not understand at the time is just how deeply my own research background in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism is to the understanding of the modernization of Asia generally and China particularly. So it gave a whole new layer and a whole new spectrum to my research. So I am officially out of time, I believe. So I say thank you, and I shall stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. Let me invite the first discussion, and Professor Wu Zhishen, please. Professor Wu.
Hi, Venerable Chair. Thank you, Professor Chen, and then also the organizer, for this opportunity to participate in this wonderful conference. Thanks, Professor Holloway for like a fantastic presentation. I was also participating in the conference yesterday and really encouraged and inspired by everyone's presentations and effort in Buddhism and management. I think Professor Holloway is very well versed in the discussions of Buddhist developments, both across like time horizon from the Asian and also with the contemporary world, and integrate his work on the individual characteristics and also kind of individual characters as well as kind of the organizational management. So just I think given the responsibility as a discussant, I try to share this presentation just quickly to maybe in an effort to highlight some of the wonderful points Professor Holloway have mentioned, but also at the same time raise some additional potential discussion possibilities. So when Professor in his presentation just now, actually one of the very important argument I think he made is very inspiring in terms of like how the different worldviews and realities that we have right now in terms of gender equality, which could be actually quite fundamentally different from historic or the contemporary perspectives. I think that it backs the questions of whether we are sometimes risking the generalizing or generally applying what we observed with the conversations that we are having right now in terms of gender equality. But like having said that, I think the recent discussions, particularly in the West in terms of gender equalities, like inclusions and diversity, also give us some interesting points and reflections on the Buddhist traditions, our doctrines, and also our management structures. I think Professor has talked about different stereotypes like Confucians and householder findings and the type of marriage, like whether those are a good showcase of our positions in different gender, and how the contemporary world, of course, like if we're thinking about or seeing the challenges from a contemporary lens, how do we react to the current conversations in the world, and some of the, I would say, even accusations that the Buddhist tradition may not be consistent with the modern perspectives of equality treatments of women or different genders. But I think what is really inspiring is from his example in terms of like what the Song dynasty, that the Song experience would manifest. And at that time, we can see actually the significance of nuns as well as lay women running family businesses. And of course, like it kind of draws to our attention that, okay, what is actually the contemporary discussions? Like what is the current dynamics, the current perspectives on gender equality right now? What I really appreciate, particularly in Professor paper, is like qualitative case studies from the Guangming College. I mean, what would be particularly intriguing, I'm trusting if he has more time, then he will throw more perspectives on the kind of the implications from that case studies. What I find quite important to notice is actually the two students and actually the college itself has Catholic and also Islam backdrop. Like they have to respect the local religion, at the same time introducing some Buddhist characters and values. So the challenge of introducing secular educations or plus a wisdom-based education from the Buddhist perspective, that is a really important showcase. The challenges he highlights in the case studies in terms of finding students, the screening and personality tests, the strict rules, like whether we should impose our moral code from the Buddhist traditions onto the students. I think that is an interesting question. And also how to allow for room for the students to maintain their own faith. I think that is very, very interesting. I think if we put this in the modern management perspective, it would ask us that the question, so if we are running a Buddhist organizations, like how do we absorb talent or nurture talent from different backgrounds? Are we allowing for and also introducing the kind of the Buddhist value, while at the same time allowing their own religious or cultural context to thrive. Are we imposing our moral code on them, and whether we can allow their own daily experience to integrate well with our management structures or management philosophy inspired by the Buddhist philosophy and teachings. I think the little effort I would try to add to the wonderful presentations by Professor is to actually also share like the what I would from my perspective would appreciate from the Buddha Dharma is actually intrinsically inclusive and diverse, realizing kind of the differences in phenomenal existence. Like here, I'm actually referring to gender, right? Because like by default, like there are obvious physical and differences from the different gender, but at the same time, there is a lot of potential and hope. If I will refer to Professor Karuna Dasa, he was referring to the enormous potential, right? Because when we see there is change, there is a possibility of changeability. It's kind of like a convoluted statement, but at the same time, that is the law of dependent arising and impermanence from the Buddhist teachings, and we can see the potential for humans to elevate and of course, like the unlucky thing is also to descend, but that is kind of the essence of moral conduct in the Buddhist philosophy. But at the same time, like we from the Buddha teachings, he taught us that like basically the potentials of human is enormous. Like even a tiny portion, as small as a pinch of dust, is unchangeable. Then he would say the human efforts would be of value. So basically, what he's saying is like there are a lot of possibilities, even though like we have some phenomenal differences, but because of impermanence, like there's so much that we can explore from human potential. So some of the Mahayana traditions discussions will refer to Buddha nature in everyone and seeing potential in everyone. It's actually quite revolutionary, even nowadays, like, to the then social and economic structures contemporary to the Buddha, societal and also economic structures. So it actually allows us to really appreciate the potentials of human minds, but at the same time understanding like there are intrinsic hindrance and difference. And then if we kind of look at the problem or the challenges we have today, how do we think about the different genders, both lay and monastics, in the past and also at the present, but still acknowledging there are like obvious obstacles and quote unquote unfairness in the current situations, and how could we respond to that with compassion and wisdom, but not with extremism or extreme thoughts or something really kind of confrontational in the process. And of course, I think one of the key message from Professor is like, how could we transcend from the contemporary worldviews of gender equality, if I understand his thesis correctly. I think one very constant reference that we would have from the Buddhist teaching is the Kalama Sutta, like how we could actually see that the Buddhist teachings fundamentally is the teachings leading to the cessations of suffering. And despite the intrinsic or distinctively different customs or different legends, traditions, local cultural behaviors or societal doctrines, how could we actually still at the same time like focusing on the teachings leading to a cessation of suffering? That is very important. And the case studies from Professor is a fantastic one, illustrating the experience from Fo Guangshan. And also we can see similar example, as Professor has mentioned, from the Zen traditions. Leaderships from different Buddhist sects also have good representations from different gender. And they are equally important, like both lay and monastics. Here, I would like to share a quote from Master Xing Yun, talking about this world cannot be the absence of women, because without them, like we would have half of the world missing. And Buddhism even need women, because without the women participations, Buddhism would not be able to move forward. Women and the world, and the relationship between women and Buddhism is so intimate and so close. But the question he also have is that what kind of expectations and what kind of wishes he would have like for women in terms of family, society, and also from the Buddhist context. So he has 4 highlights or aspirations in terms of using compassion to beautify the society, the mind or the heart of the society, to use the perseverance to resolve violence, use the spirituality and wisdom to enhance the color in the world, and then finally use peace to bring prosperity for society. I think probably one of the reasons why I was invited to be in this session is my affiliation with Tongling Kotyun. As some of you may know, our founder, Lady Cara Ho, is also like a lay Buddhist who very focused on education, where she actually mentioned the essence, the reason why she founded school for women is because she see that there are equally enormous potential in both men and women. But with education, you can really allow them to prosper. So secular education plus introductory Buddhism or Buddhist teachings allow individuals, the women, could be a good citizen in a country, in a family, could be a respected child, son or daughter, and then eventually change the world and then change human hearts. And then she also kind of mentioned that like woman is actually the mother of the nation. So with good education, then they can form family and then leading to a harmonious society. So I think at closing, I think my questions and also my suggestions is actually to think about how in the context of Buddhism and management, we can facilitate growth and human flourishing. And I think that is kind of leading eventually up to our discussions on Buddhism and management. Here are some of my humble contributions in terms of Buddhism management and economics. Thank you everyone for the time and the opportunity to share and participate in these conversations. It's a great and rewarding experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Wu. Let me invite our second discussant, Professor Chao Gang. Professor Chao, please.
尊敬的主持人，尊敬的陈教授，大家上午好。那我在这里呢，可能只能用中文来给大家汇报哈。那我尊敬的主持人 Professor Holloway， 还有各位嘉宾，大家上午好。我针对刚才Professor Holloway 先生他的这篇文章，他谈的是佛教中的性别平等及其对商业的重要性。主持人能看到我的这个共享的屏幕吗？吴教授？
Yes, 可以的。
可以的哈，好的。那么这篇文章呢，从一开始哈，就用一个呢星云大师的一句话来说哈，说人间佛教呢，它涉及到当代社会的问题，因此呢，它从一开始呢，就将其视为宗教的一种特征，而不是一种现代的发明。那就是说呢，这个佛教的精神哈，它是从佛教自身来讲呢，它就是关注社会的。而不仅仅是像有些人一些人的看法，仅仅是在一个很封闭的或者是一个山区里边去修行这样一种做法不关心人间的事物，并非如此。那这种为什么我想作者哈Holloway 先生为什么他一开始就用这个星云大师的这样一句话呢？因为呢这种观点呢，事实上呢，在学术界呢，可以说呢是影响非常广泛的是哈。人们一提起佛教，甚至说包括东方的其他的一些文化哈，常常都认为呢，这些跟现实的这种关怀接触不是特别多。那么佛教也好，道教也好，可能都是如此。所以作者呢就提到呢哈，那么西方学术界 也包括呢深受西方学术影响的当代的中国的学术界，他们大多都认为呢，佛教并不关心当代社会的实际问题啊，可能只是关心我个人的修行。那么这种观点呢，在西方呢可以说呢是由来已久啊，在上个世纪，叔本华他也是称赞佛教呢专注于来生的这种救赎。所以后来呢，马克思韦伯就在叔本华的这种观点的基础之上呢，就认为呢，这个缺乏对这一世俗问题的关注，就是对现实人间世界的这样一个关注呢，就导致了亚洲的这种经济的停滞。而且他认为呢，就是说这个只有新教呢才是文明经济繁荣的这样一个唯一的途径。那这种观点呢，其实在学术界的影响呢非常广泛。大家都知道呢，马克思韦伯他撰写了新教伦理与资本主义精神这本书。事实上呢，他还写过关于这个儒教与道教甚至关于佛教的一些著作。那么他的这些观点呢，大多数都是认为呢，就是东方的这种文化特别是佛教呢，对于现实世界这个经济问题呢关注是不多的那么这种文化呢，就影响了东方的经济发展，也影响了这个近代的资本主义在中国在东方的这样一个国兴。那么这篇文章，我觉得它特别有价值的就在于呢，就是既然马克思韦伯他认为佛教跟商业成功是对立的一种关系，所以呢，本文呢就选择了一个独特的视角。这个视角呢，既是呢现代的企业经营非常关注的一个视角，那就是性别平等的这样一个视角那么现在在商业里边呢，就是很关注这样一个问题，特别是在招聘的时候，在晋升的时候，都非常重视这个性别的平等。那么这种性别平等在佛教文化里边，它到底是如何看待这样一个问题的呢？这是就是本文的一个非常独特的一个很有价值的研究视角那么作为具体的研究的对象呢，那这篇文章呢，我看呢，它主要是从2个方面来进行展开的一个呢是传统社会以宋朝的妇女为主他们参与社会经济活动，以它作为研究对象。那么另外一个呢，就是我们佛光山在菲律宾创办的这个光明学院的学生特别是他的毕业生为研究对象这是他的研究视角和对象那么这篇文章它的一些基本的观点首先他认为呢，从宋朝以来，性别平等和参与商业的关系一直是佛教的重要的组成部分就是说佛教界呢，其实从宋朝以来都很关注这个性别的平等问题。那么第二个它的主要观点基本观点呢就是认为呢，佛教提倡性别的平等，并且呢把它作为帮助妇女摆脱贫困这样一个循环的一种手段。就是妇女她要想提高自己的社会地位那么通过那个佛教界呢，在这个帮助妇女呢在经营方面，在生活方面呢，对他们施以助手呢，就可以帮助他们呢始终在这一种比较贫困的状态下，这样一种生活的状态就摆脱这种状态。那么这种作者呢梳理了关于性别平等的一些观点那么反对性别平等，其实这种观点呢不仅仅是东方有，在西方也是可以说呢是长久以来都存在的就这种观点呢，它是渊源已久的。有很多人甚至将这种观点建立在植根于传统家庭价值观的基础之上，就是传统的家庭要想有一个好的家庭，那就必须要妇女守在家里边这个为家庭付出。所以他们就认为呢，妇女的角色在历史上就仅限于照顾孩子做做饭打扫卫生所以这种观点呢，在西方也是有一个长期的影响。那么即使到了19世纪，英国妇女的这种处境呢，也是很悲惨的事。所以他们没有能力呢，能够在假设男性从男性那里得不到帮助的话，他们很难获得应有的法律上的地位。所以这种观念的这种变化是比较晚的，直到20世纪才逐渐的女性呢获得一些选举权 那么佛教呢，在中国历史上对女性它的影响是什么样子呢？是吧？那么这个就是上述的现象和观点哈，就是说妇女的地位哈，就是应该守住家庭。在这个方面呢，并不能代表全世界。事实上呢，作者认为呢，佛教在中国历史上对于女性的生活是产生了积极的影响的是。那为什么这样说呢？哈，他就特别是列举了就关于宋朝的女性的这种经济的她的权力很大。作者讨论了唐朝、宋朝的妇女的地位。那么我们一般人可能常常认为哈，就是唐朝比较开放，女性的地位可能比较高。作者呢指出呢哈，就说宋朝的女性的经济权利呢，事实上呢比中国历史上呢任何时期都要大。妇女可以提出离婚的诉讼，再婚也是社会可以接受的。那么有一些尼姑庵呢，不仅独立于男性的监督而存在，他们就是自主经营、自主管理哈，而且还获得了重要的社会、政治和经济的地位。这些尼姑庵呢是当地社区的一些经济中心，为印刷经书、修建寺庙、举办宴会呢，都能够提供一些资金。那么这些经济的这种主体哈，对于妇女地位的提高，事实上它是有很大的帮助的时候。那么讨论了这个历史上的这个女性的地位，特别是宋朝女性的地位哈。那么作者呢就是 Holloway 先生哈，他特别引用了这个现代的一个商业的案例哈，就是我们佛光山在菲律宾开办了这个光明学院在这个光明学院里面呢，特别强调促进性别的平等。佛光山在菲律宾开办的这个光明学院哈，目标呢是教育学生，让他们摆脱这种贫困的这种循环。光明学院的学生，事实上呢，他们信奉的是当地的宗教，一个呢是天主教，也有少量的是伊斯兰教。但是这个学院呢就鼓励学生呢，就是继续你信奉你的这个宗教，就不强迫呢，你不是说到我们光明学院来，你一定要皈依佛教那么光明学院在这方面抱着一种开放性的态度这个呢也得到了很多学生的这种赞可哈。那么Professor Holloway 呢，他的研究对象呢，就以光明学院的2018年的2个毕业生作为他的研究的这个样本。那么这2个样本呢，虽然只有2个人呢，但是它具有一定的代表性。他们都是来学习表演艺术、舞蹈、唱歌这种和表演的这样的女生，在学院里面有一定的代表性这些你看他的这些专业呢，都与这个文化艺术有一定的关系哈。佛光山呢，在光明学院积极促进性别平等，为社会经济边缘化的妇女提供扎实的大学教育旨在为他们提供经济独立的手段。大家可能也有所了解哈，就是在菲律宾呢，其实女性的地位呢也并不是特别高由于国家的这个经济发展可能还是受到一定的局限哈，那么女性的地位呢就更低一点，很多女孩子呢就没有这样一个受教育的机会。那么光明学院呢在这个方面做出了特别的努力来给他们提供一些资金提供这个场所提供师资，让他们到这里来学习，获得了很好的一个效果。那么这些学生毕业以后呢，他们就可以经济上就更加的自立。那么对于这篇文章呢我也谈谈我的一点点个人的看法哈。我觉得这篇文章呢，它的一个这个优点哈，就是它的视角很独特哈，从女性及其经济地位的视角来探讨了佛教的影响力，就是从而反驳了韦伯的观点。就是韦伯呢认为呢，这个东方的文化，特别是佛教呢，对于经济发展没有促进，没有帮助。那么Professor Holloway 呢，就从他的这样一个调研历史的数据和现实的数据呢，就反驳了韦伯的这样一个观点他强调女性的独立性。另外呢，本文呢，它也结合了历史文献的分析和当代的一些数据，就是光明学院的这样一个数据。我觉得这是本文呢就是很好的一个地方哈。那说这篇文章呢，如果说要有个改进的空间呢，就是我个人的一点看法哈，就是这个文章似乎还没有写完，好像是哈，还存在一些改进的空间。比如说 是不是应该进一步考虑如何将我们对于宋朝的这样的历史的文献的分析与当代数据的分析能够结合起来，把它们二者之间打通，梳理一下二者的内在关联是什么？就是说，从宋代到当代，从中国到菲律宾，为什么将这些事件要将这些事件联系起来？它们内在的关联是什么？那么在作者呢，其实在这个方面可以做进一步的一个梳理哈。第二个呢，就是这个文章呢，它的数据量较小。然后比如说光明学院呢，只有2个样本，而且是个体的样本，不是一个组织样本，所以它的这个样本量太小呢，就影响了这个文章的这个说服力哈。那么在研究方法上呢，也有可以改进的空间。比如说文章提出的这些事例，如何进一步的能够形成一个故事链让这些数据之间能够相互的验证。那么最后呢，这篇文章呢，我认为呢，还是应该有一个总结哈。比如说佛教文化中，它重视女性，那来自于什么？比如说它跟这个佛教里边的众生平等的观念如何汇集到女性如何进一步影响了其女性的经济地位？这影响甚至是跨越了时间的差异，就是说从宋朝到现代，也跨越了空间的差异，就是从中国大陆到菲律宾。那么这些呢，作者呢在最后呢应该有一个总结哈。这以上观点呢，仅仅是我个人的一点点看法哈，仅供参考。谢谢。
Thank you. Thank you so much for the two discussants. And let me see if from the chat box if there are any question from the floor. 各位观众，各位法师同道，尊敬的专家学者，网上的、现场的，都希望你们能够提问。我们收集一些问题，再请那个 Professor Holloway 来一并来回答。Now I invite a question or comment suggestion from the floor. Please text your questions or your comments in the chat box, and we'll direct the question to Professor Holloway.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, how much time do I have to respond?
Let's say in about 10 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes would be enough. Yeah.
Perfect. Actually, if I may share my screen again, I think that might help because I'll be honest, I really thank the discussants for their comments, because in fact, there was a conclusion that I was thinking about in the paper that I didn't share. This is part of when I gave lectures at Dazhuesi on Buddhism and business. I started by quoting Bernanke, Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And this is my translation in Chinese up here. Basically, wait a second, this is...
Professor.
Yeah?
Would you mind to wait for a couple of minutes? And because
sure.
We're still collecting questions from...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Let me see. Please show the question, and so that the professor can also say it. Yes. Can you see?
Yes, I see the question about.
If there's any more question, please type, and be quick because we don't have much time left.
How about if I start answering the question about the typhoon while the others come in?
Yes,
that's kind of a short answer.
Yes, show in the chat box.
Yeah. So basically, the challenge that Dr. Correa had was that usually when you're trying to decide which students to enroll and which students to not enroll.
There are more questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yes, I think that's all. So, Professor, go ahead, please.
Okay. So the problem is when you're trying to reach socioeconomically marginalized people, particularly women, a standardized test is not a good way to measure their intellectual aptitude. So what she developed was a personality test. Unfortunately, the first personality tests that she found were based on Western models. Then she found a locally based personality test. And it was based on this personality test that was the first cut for who would or would not be an acceptable student at Guangming College. Basically, what she's trying to understand is, are these good students? Are these good people? Are they good-hearted? Right? Are they compassionate? 他们有没有慈悲心? Right? And if they're compassionate, then they have potential. And that was a really brilliant decision she made. And I know Heidi has gone on for a master's degree in Taiwan. I think she was at Nanhua Daxue studying like script writing, something like that, playwriting, that sort of thing. As far as beyond that, I don't know. But yeah, so that's my answer to these questions. But I think dovetailing on that importance of compassion, that would probably be a good segue to the preliminary ideas that I was going to discuss, because, you know, when what Bernanke tries to say is that usually when we think about economics, we think about the allocation of scarce resources, right? This is his remarks in 2012. But really, what that leaves out is the ultimate purpose of economics, which is to understand and promote well-being. And so oftentimes people think of economics as overly narrow. And so then I looked through some recent scholarship. There's a professor at Arizona State University who did publish an article on social responsibility and altruism. Altruism is what I translate as 利他主义, right? Which is essentially not far from 慈悲心 or compassion, right? In Buddhism. And she finds that social responsibility and altruism are very important to small to medium-sized innovative businesses. She wasn't looking for this in the field work that she was doing. Businesses voluntarily stated that they felt that social responsibility and altruism are central. 80% of the businesses she interviewed said that things like, luckily we're a profitable company, but what we're really about is making sure we're making a difference in people's lives. So social responsibility is incredibly important for business. And that's something that I think will connect this Song Dynasty world to this modern world, to the values of Buddhism, is to understand that a lot of times people misrepresent what makes for a successfully managed business. They think it's just about the bottom line, and that morality and ethics are not part of this, right, at any cost. But really, there's been some interesting scholarship arguing against that. Another respondent said, I can be making money, but I can also be building relationships with people in the community. And so the study does not measure actual business practices. This is like fieldwork. This is interviewing these business owners. And they consistently stressed, though, that they were wanting to do good, right, as a driving force in their businesses. Businesses for the greater good. And this is what emerged. It was unanticipated. It was not what she was looking for, but it was a very surprising result. And the final one, that article that I found from the Economic Journal of 2014, is what predicts a successful life in terms of how do you know who's going to be successful going forward? And it found that pro-social behavior, again, 利他主义, is the very important factor in educational achievement and income. And so when we think about what Buddhist values are, right, when Master Xing Yun says the 三好, 做好话, 说好 做好事，说好话，存好心, right? Do good deeds, say good words, and keep a positive mind, right? That is his definition of what is Buddhism. And when you look at that and you look at some very cutting edge literature on business management and economics, you see a parallel. And I think that is what is a potential connection here. The second part of this is that I think it's very important to read a lot of scholarship on the 20th century world and how a lot of the ideas that all of us take for granted and often imagined to be very ancient in origin are sometimes really very modern. One book that really changed how I look at the pre-modern world was published in 2009. It was a scholar who's now at Brown University in America. Her name is Rebecca Nadostov. It's called Superstitious Regimes. And what her book argues is that this idea that Confucianism is a philosophy and not a religion, and that this idea that Buddhism is superstitious and not socially productive, all of these ideas were constructed in the Nanjing decade, so like 27 to 37, the Nanjing Zhengfu 那个时代, when they were looking to oppress and eradicate traditional religious institutions and to promote the sort of Western Protestant idea. It really shocked me because in 2009, I'd completed a PhD in traditional Chinese religion, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. I'd already published a book on Taoism and Confucianism. And I was pretty sure that Confucianism was mostly a philosophy. I thought that it did not have strongly religious elements. And then she publishes a book arguing that that idea can be really specifically dated to 27 to 37, 1927 and 1937. It's not old. It is presenting an idea about an old time, but it's very new. And so that's also what drives my interest in thinking about modern times, business practices, all of these current ideas, because I feel that these ways that the tradition is represented as being either pro-gender equality or anti-gender equality, pro-economic development or anti-economic development, all of these ideas impinge directly on my own research on Confucianism and Taoism, and my current book projects are on Weimo Jiejing, the Vimalakirti Sutra, and I'm editing a book on Buddhism and the body. So I'm looking broadly at Chinese religion. And I feel that if I'm not careful about reading modern scholarship, then I'm just going to be transmitting some of these very recent ideas without thinking critically about them. So that's why I was very excited to participate in this conference today, is to help me to refine my ideas about how this question of the past and the present and this intersection of humanistic Buddhism, how it works and how I can understand it better. Because honestly, it is a really challenging question that this one outlined in Master Xingyun's book, Humanistic Buddhism, because if he is correct, and I think he is, then a lot of these ideas that I have been taking for granted need to be reassessed. So I think there's a couple more questions. There's a lot more questions. Yeah, I answered that one already. Yeah, that's a comment. Yeah, yes. Yeah, this. So the other side of this is that this idea that Confucianism is separate from Buddhism. There's a recently published book called The Buddhist Roots of Jushi's Ideas, that Jushi's ideas come from Buddhism. We have this idea that Buddhism are the good guys, Confucians are maybe the bad guys in terms of gender equality. But really this idea that Confucianism and Buddhism are separate is not how it worked, particularly in the Song dynasty, where you ask Surongpo, right? If you could go back in time, was Surongpo a Buddhist, a Confucian, a Taoist? He was a Song dynasty man, right? He was all three, and trying to divide Confucian versus Buddhism, that's not really how it works. Really, the Song was a very progressive time, and that was indebted to the wonderful ideas of Buddhism and how they merged with Confucianism.
Professor, we still
Yes.
have about 10 minutes left. Any supplement you want to provide us with, or the discussant, you any further response to Professor Holloway's ideas, response?
So there's starting to be some questions in here about promoting Buddhism in the United States.
I don't think that's relevant to your presentation at all.
Yeah. I mean, I can talk about it, but I don't think that's, I don't think
that
that's
is the suitable occasion. Let me professionally, let's just focus on the presentations.
right. So I think that and maybe for 5 minutes, talk about this question of the connection. So one of the scholars that I discuss in my paper is this fellow Morton Schluter, and he argues that the way that we understand Buddhism today, right? His book is called How Zen Became Zen, although he's actually talking about Chan Buddhism. His editor said you have to use the word Zen, otherwise no one's going to know what you're talking about. But anyway, he's talking about Chan Buddhism in the Song. You have to sell books too, right? These economic challenges. And he's arguing that what we love and appreciate about Buddhism today came together because of the engagement of Buddhism with the political debates of the Song dynasty. And what's particular about the Song dynasty that's different from the Tang dynasty is that court debates were not about just like the feudal elites, right? In the Tang, what was debated at court was just about the top 1% of society. They really did not talk about real people's lives. All of a sudden in the Song, you have Sima Guang and Wang Anshi arguing about what's best for the average person, inclusive of like farmers and peasants, as a very revolutionary moment, right? That's what we today would call a very progressive regime. And there was a two-party system, Liang Dang, Dang Pai, right? And they were arguing against each other about whether we should have a more big government model or a small government model. One were about grassroots change, that would be Wang Anshi, or one which was more conservative about maintaining the status quo, that would be Sima Guang, right? And within that debate as to what was the right way forward, suddenly the court is talking about what we should do for the average person, right? And we used to think that debate was just something that related to the Confucians, and the Buddhists were kind of off in their own reclusive world. But what Schluter demonstrates is that's false. These Buddhist monks and nuns were deeply engaged with that debate in court over whether you should have a big government model promoting social change or a small government model. If they were not engaged in politics, you can't become a Shifang Congling, right? You can't become this famous, right, public monastery. And you certainly cannot become the abbot of that monastery. The abbot of that monastery is selected by the government. If you cannot speak to the topics of the times, if you're not engaged, if you're not following what Master Xingyun calls humanistic Buddhism, you're not going to be able to achieve that status, because that is involving a connection with the politics and social problems of the Song dynasty. And that was a really revolutionary book, because what he demonstrated is that both Linji and Caodong sects measured their own value based on how engaged they are. They criticized each other for not being engaged enough. for not being humanistic enough, right? In our common parlance today, right? They each were pointing fingers saying, you're not humanistic enough. You're not humanistic enough. You need to be more engaged. No, you need to be more engaged. And this argument between them was reflective of a broader Song dynasty argument where they felt that social engagement with social problems was fundamentally important. And if you look at something like the Qiming Shanghe Tu, right, which we all know, that beautiful picture, you've got all the regular common people there. And that Song, that reflects this Song dynasty value of diversity and inclusion, right? There's all kinds of people in there. And you compare that to, Tang dynasty images, which are beautiful, but you get people playing polo. That's a sport of the elites, even if women were doing it, right? It's a very different world, this Tang in earlier times. It's more feudal, whereas the Song was more modern. And that modernity is Buddhist. It is what made Buddhism this thing that is this humanistic phenomenon that is relevant today. So that's the other kind of conclusion piece coming through Morton Schluter's scholarship to reflect how this value system that I'm talking about really is important to understand, because otherwise you'll say, I don't care about gender equality. That's this modern American or European thing. That's not what the tradition is about. It was, in fact, that is exactly what the tradition is about. And that is exactly what this traditional Buddhism is about. And that's something that Venerable Master Xing Yun gets absolutely correct. And it's really quite brilliant. So those are my concluding remarks.
Yeah, interesting. We still got several minutes left, but let me bring forward the question and comment from Professor Chao again. That is about the research methodology, because there's a problem or concern for a too small a basis for evidence and making overgeneralization. And because the coverage of your presentation ranging from at least from 10th century to the 21st century. And in such a broad time span, now you are risking yourself for cherry picking. So I myself can cite 10 or more than 10 example, though I beg to disagree with what you have said, right? And like the rising social status from the Song dynasty onwards for the female. Now we can also challenge you, if I may, is even the female, especially including the Buddhist nun, are put into a category together with prostitute and other things who are regarded as of low social status, right? Or even outclassed in the Ming dynasty. They call themselves as the San Gu Liu Po, right? Now, then this is some obvious evidence that is stand against what you have said. You have the responsibility to take care of the opposing sides instead of, if I may, posing a rosy picture of Buddhism, right?
Excellent. Yes.
Secondly, it seems that you are also picking on some thesis that especially pervade in the first half of the perhaps 20th century scholarship, not influenced by the German scholar and others, and especially also reflected by Japanese scholar, not just by Naito Kurai, Miyazaki as well, right? To talk about the modernity in the Song dynasty and others, right? But this has been seriously challenged. Kyoto School has been seriously challenged. And what are your response to this kind of challenge, right? Thirdly, now you also talk about this kind of, you put it in a very ambiguous way. Sorry to say that, is that the return or the Buddhism repeat the original teaching or what Buddha has taught. and represent as a representation in the Song dynasty, then you are talking about two antiquity. The first antiquity is the time of the Buddha. The second antiquity is the time of the Song dynasty, which in their time they try to represent what Buddha had taught. Now, what kind of tradition are you talking about? Or you're suggesting there is a continuity between the original Buddhist teaching and the Song dynasty teaching? Or you're suggesting they are different? If they are different, what justifies humanities Buddhism as a true representation of the original teaching if we can ever figure out what it was, right? So that's especially challenge your interpretation of the Bajingfa. Please explain. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I was hoping for, is we could have a discussion like this. First of all, the problem with this Song is the modern period is the Mongols come next, and the Mongol Yuan dynasty was a terrible place to be a woman. Okay, in the world, it was really awful. It was also a pretty terrible place if you were Chinese for the most part. It was a rough, not a very well administered time. Beata Grant has talked about women Zen masters, Buddha Chan masters in the Ming dynasty. And there are women who are able to transcend a lot of the stereotypes and rumors about the connection between Buddhist nuns and sing-song girls and prostitutes and this thing. But it's clear that although the Song dynasty was a very progressive time, it did not lead to a continuation of positive times for women and gender equality. It did not. It got far worse. So that's something that's important to say. As far as the whether or not Naito's ideas have survived the test of time, Patricia Ebree's scholarship has been pretty well accepted going forward, and she herself is an intellectual, descendant of Naito Konan. Robert Hartwell went and demonstrated the economic correctness of the general idea of Konan. Peter Lorge at Vanderbilt has discussed the military success of the Song dynasty, which is pretty surprising because they ended up losing to the Mongols, but he argues they did a very good job despite that. So there's quite a number of people who have taken sort of pieces of Naito's ideas and demonstrated its solidity. And so I think that's important. And in terms of the jump in time, right? We're talking about India, we're talking about the Song dynasty. I'm making very clear, I'm talking about how this Indian tradition is interpreted through the lens of the Song dynasty. Venerable Master Xing Yun is claiming that represents the true intention of the Buddha, but really what I can know about is how it's manifested in the Song. This whole idea about Yuan Si Fo Jiao and it all must go back to India, I don't ascribe to that, and I agree that's a very good point of clarification. Yes, these are people living in China in the Song dynasty, thinking about the teachings of the Buddha, but it's filtered through translators, it's filtered through their own local political perspectives, all of this stuff. And you're absolutely correct, couldn't agree more, that this represents a Song world looking back at something which is lost in the mists of time. When the Buddha even lived, we can't even know what century he lived in. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Well, we are running out of time, and let's join me to thanks the Professor Holloway and our two discussants with big hands, right? Thank you so much. And for all. So,
thanks for sharing.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. And this is the end of this section. Bye bye now.
Thank you.